It's a very good question, and it's a mystery because in China they're actually persecuting a group of Muslim called Uyghurs, right? So it's a straight contradiction. If they're not even supporting a religious minority in their own country, why are they supporting this group that's funding a lot of terrorism in the Middle East? Because one of the big aspects of the CCP is not who they choose to align based on, values of virtue or values of goodness. What they choose to align with are those that are capable of supporting their own regime. Because the CCP's nature is one built on bloodshed and power struggle and political struggles. And so in that sense, there are many countries, especially authoritarian and totalitarian regimes out there, who also appeal to that same idea, right? Because what political struggle and what power struggles essentially are is a form of battle within itself. But the CCP is really about struggling against everything in its existence, right? So unfortunately, what that means is a lot of times they choose to align with evil, and they choose to align with murderous regimes. And so you see the closest allies of the CCP right now is North Korea, Russia, Iran. So these countries have a clear record of whether they're invading another country or they have a violation of human rights or something along those lines. And that really fits the nature of the Chinese Communist Party from its birth to its ruling to the nature of the regime. The Chinese people that we speak of versus the Chinese government today, that's two different concepts, right? The Chinese people and China as a nation in its history has been very different. It's rooted in values, like very traditional values, like family, like Confucianist values, and those of loving the family, those around them, and so on. These were destroyed during the Cultural Revolution. So the Chinese people that the Jewish people have been familiar with for decades or maybe even centuries are different from the ruling Chinese government today, because the ruling Chinese government today, what they've done is they've tried to co-opt the idea that they represent China and the Chinese people. But we have many different versions of what represents China. You have overseas Chinese, you have Taiwanese people, you have mainland China right now. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to continue that idea that we are the descendants of the Han people or the Chinese people. But what they've done over the past decades is that they've actually committed a lot of atrocities against the Chinese people, the CCP that is. So in that sense, what I recommend is that the Jewish people really understand that today's CCP is actually using the name of the Chinese people to do their evil biddings, and in doing so, like supporting regimes of the current Iranian regime, and like supporting other, what we call is the axis of evil. So they're really putting a bad rep on what it means to be Chinese people, because all they've done is really destroy what used to actually represent China and the Chinese population. So I think that obviously there's a lot of emotions and a lot of historical connections, or maybe perhaps even feelings that we should continue this in some ways. But I think that it's still very important to understand that China does not equal to the Chinese Communist Party, and in doing so, we have to know that to separate the Chinese people from the Chinese government. You can still love the Chinese people, but you should recognize the nature of the CCP. So I'll take you this to not just with this war, but actually with previous actions by Israel in the past year or so. Actually since October 7th, is that there's a clear-minded group of people in China that do believe that what Israel is doing is correct, and that it is defending itself against threats around it, particularly when it comes to the Hamas or the Hezbollah situation. But a group of people, in China, what they do is they listen to what the CCP tells them. But I think a major trend in the past year or so is this growing hate towards Israel. Because China is always looking for people to blame, countries to blame, and so Israel has become the latest target after Japan and the United States. But also, I think this isn't just something that came out of the, a random event, because we've actually seen over the past at least 4 or 5 years since I've been covering China, is that there's been a lot of sort of confusing messages when it comes to Israel, because they understand that Israelis feel pretty close to China, yet at the same time they can't really abandon the Middle Eastern partners that they have, which is Iran, Palestine, and so on. And so in that sense, there's a very conflicting message. Sometimes that propaganda goes overboard and it develops into hate. But in recent, because of recent events, there's obviously a more uptick in terms of the hate, and then less on the friendship side. What the CCP has done, both in Russia and now with Iran, is actually not about the full, let's say, let's send them missiles and guns. What they've done is, for example, Iran and China has this 25-year friendship deal that they signed, which allows China to buy a huge amount of oil and a huge amount of resource from Iran. So what the CCP essentially does, without trying to trigger this international conflict when it comes to, blaming the CCP for, hey, you're supporting them in the war, is they do it through economic means or other ways to export to the country that they support. So with Iran, there were some rumors about planes that flew into Tehran just prior to the strikes. But again, we can't really know what they sent in or brought out, or maybe what they didn't bring. But what I do want to emphasize to people is that the CCP is supplying Iran for many years through financial means. And essentially, the Middle Eastern proxy of terrorism that Iran has been able to supply, that money ends up actually coming from the CCP, because they're the biggest financier of Iran in the region. And so what they do is not, you can't categorize it as war, but the actions of Iran have shown us that that money is being used for war and for other conflicts in the region.